Congrats on your engagement. When celebrity fitness guru Luke Douglas introduces her as his fiancée in front of millions of TV viewers, Cammie Sauza figures it's payback. 3 years ago, Luke tried to seduce her. Can she devise her own red-hot revenge without becoming the millionaire playboy's next conquest? Seizing the chance to prank his sister's best friend was too irresistible for Luke to pass up. Now he wants to make it up to the camera-shy Seattle artist by posing for her in the buff. Will Luke's fame destroy his shot at a future with Cammie? Or will an explosive mutual seduction lead to a real-life proposal? Luke Douglas had posted over 1,000 photos of himself online, clothed, unclothed, face, or body shots. But today marked the first time he'd worn makeup. Cindy, part of the television crew, smelled like the pink bubblegum she was chewing. She powdered his nose before giving him a once-over and then removed the protective paper from the neck of his sleeveless shirt. All set, hon. She sounded local. Chicago native, he'd bet. Luke wasn't. He'd relocated from Seattle after franchising his fitness center last year. This location on State Street would make the 11th Genius Fit he'd opened. He'd finally hit his long-time goal of being in business for himself, putting his big brain to work and using his internet star status as a launching pad to bigger and better things. But joining the Millionaire Club hadn't been like he'd expected. He had more material possessions, sure, his loft downtown, and a $3,000 Diamondback bicycle for commuting around the city. But he didn't eat caviar. He only owned one suit. He was the same guy. His number of online followers had grown times 10 as a result of expanding Genius Fit. And yet he hadn't landed a single date since he moved to this city. 5 minutes a TV crew member called. Today was the grand opening for Genius Fit, and a crowd had gathered. Men and women alike had taken to the machines or were chatting with their personal trainers. Others gaped in interest at the television cameras next to the treadmills. Luke loved a gym. He'd gone into personal training for the sheer joy of showing others how to change their bodies, until his schedule became the stuff of nightmares. He didn't have the time to help everyone personally, so he'd started Genius Fit, a hat tip to his IQ, as well as the science that inspired his gym philosophy. Losing weight, building muscle there was a formula, and Genius Fit taught it to great and growing success. From his periphery, a flash of red hair caught his attention. The redhead was familiar, but not from his recent memory. The bag on her shoulder was bright purple, her clothes understated black athleisure wear. She took in the surrounding melee with curiosity before meeting his eyes and locking in. Those eyes narrowed with recognition. She knew him too. Then it hit him. His sister Sabrina's artist friend, who'd moved to Chicago. Of all the gym joints in the world, Luke pushed past lingering crew members in hot pursuit of the woman from his past. Her eyes were the intense flame blue he remembered, but her hair was longer. Her lips were the same Cupid's bow he'd wanted to sample 3 years ago. Regretfully, he hadn't had the pleasure. "Hiya, Cammie." He grinned when her mouth parted in surprise. "Been a while." Cammie Sauza could tell by the smug set of Luke's mouth that his cockiness had gone nowhere in the handful of years since she'd seen him. Her friend Sabrina's younger brother had spent the entirety of Sab's birthday party flirting with Cammie. She'd thwarted his attempts to seduce her, which she'd told herself were cute, but he'd been potent then, even at age 27. By her estimations, he was just over 30 now. And good God, was he gorgeous. She snapped her mouth closed, opening it to say, "Luke, right?" No sense in giving him the satisfaction of knowing she hadn't forgotten his electric green eyes, or the slight dimple that dented his right cheek when he smiled. He'd always been a good-looking guy and fit, but he'd put on even more muscle since. The breadth of his shoulders was as jaw-dropping as the tempting span of his chest. And what was better was that he wasn't a muscle-bound idiot. Luke was smart, Einstein smart. Drool, right. His devilish grin widened. "What brings you to Chicago?" She pushed a lock of hair behind her ear. Thankfully, she dabbed on a little makeup this morning. She was as far from a gym rat as could be, so she certainly hadn't expected to bump into someone she knew. "From Seattle, no less. This is my place. I live here." He propped his hands on his hips. "Well, not here. I bought a loft on Lakeshore Drive." "Lakeshore? Fancy. I thought you were a math wizard." With his IQ, Cammie had assumed he'd make millions off the stock exchange. "And you own a gym?" "Several gyms." A flash of anger flared in his eyes as his jaw squared. Oh. She wondered if she'd inadvertently insulted him. "Genius Fit is my brainchild." Before she could apologize, one of the TV crew behind him shouted, 60 seconds. Where's Luke?" Luke narrowed emerald-colored eyes at Cammie, and she fidgeted under his scrutiny. "Come watch. It'll be fun." But he was already leading her toward the cameras. Luke took his mark next to Michael Fortner, Channel 7's senior anchor. Cammie hung back when they went live. Michael peppered Luke with questions including, "What's your biggest challenge as the owner of the newest fitness method sweeping the country?" "Being underestimated by people who think I'm more brawn than brains." Luke's gaze clashed with Cammie's, and her neck grew hot. "Turns out I have both." She had insulted him. Her fair skin didn't hide her mortification, but Luke wasn't interested in letting her hide. "Don't take my word for it." A mischievous glint lit his eyes before he extended a hand in her direction. "Just ask my fiancé. Cammie, sweetheart, walk your pretty self over here." Just last night, she was telling me how much she hated when people assumed I should be an accountant or a college professor. Luke's hand was wrapped around Cammie's waist, his fingers grazing the bottom of her sports bra. Meanwhile, she stared into the unblinking cyborg eye of the camera and tried not to throw up. "Smart people can appreciate physical exercise too, right, honey?" A squeeze to her ribs made her blink as a tentative smile shook her lips. She hated cameras. Hated having her picture taken in any capacity. It was why she hid behind her art. Photos of her paintings she was proud of. Photos of herself, not so much. Michael and Luke continued their for daytime TV banter. By the time the cameras were off and the crew had relaxed, she was angry enough to spit hornets. She shook off Luke's arm still around her waist. "What the hell was that? I didn't know you were camera shy." He frowned. "Well, I am." She lowered her voice. "Fiancé. Why, I'm more than a gym rat." She knew that. "I never said you weren't. You thought I didn't make something of myself in the 3 years since we talked." "Get over yourself. I shot you down, and now you're taking me to task for it." "Shot me down." He huffed a dry laugh. "You were too good to talk to me. I didn't wait." She didn't have to stand here and defend herself. Especially when he'd pranked her for payback. "You know what? Forget it. Cammie, wait." Goodbye, Luke. That evening post-shower and a glass of crisp white wine in hand, Cammie's phone chirped 3 times in a row. She knew who it was without looking. That was Maria's text tone. "Saw you on TV and OMG, I could die." Luke Douglas's fiancé. "What the hell, girl?" It was a joke, Cammie typed. Followed by, "How do you know Luke Douglas? Are you kidding?" Why would she be kidding? Before she could reply, another text from Maria lit her screen. "I want to lick him from head to toe. Go to Instagram. @LukeDoug. I don't have Instagram." She hated social media almost as much as cameras. Like she'd indulge on a platform where the main goal was to take photos of herself. The next text from Maria was a link, and curious, Cammie tapped it. A web page opened up showing at Luke Doug in the flesh. A lot of flesh. One particular photo was Luke shirtless, paired with a smolder that was pure alpha male. Another was him in a pair of board shorts mid-cannonball into a pool. Yet another was a black and white of him in a stone shower hand in his hair. Eyes closed, white towel on his waist, dangerously close to slipping. She told herself not to, but she kept scrolling anyway. Cammie couldn't stop scrolling through the photos of Luke, which might make her a giant pervert. In her defense, the feed was public and open to any rando who wanted to scroll through and look at his everything. And my, each inch was as glorious as the last. Ripped abs, rounded shoulders, corded forearms. His pecs were biteable, and so was the peak of his ass in a few tasteful photos where he flirted with bearing it all. In the photos, he was unreachable cover model aloof, but in his videos, his silliness came out. That same throaty, self-conscious laugh and unrestrained smile had made more than one appearance the last time she'd seen him. It was impossible not to smile along with him, even if he had tried to teach her a lesson today in the wrongest way imaginable. After falling all the way down the rabbit hole and enjoying her second glass of wine, Cammie decided what the hell and opened an Instagram account for herself. At Cammie Sauza wasn't taken. She shared a few photos of her favorite paintings taken in her studio. She debated using a painting as her headshot, but then decided to pull a decent photo of herself. This one was from her last painting class, and she cropped out the other ladies and zoomed in on her face. Despite disliking the camera, she could admit she'd looked pretty that day, even with the stripe of blue paint on her cheek. So there she was, 3 photos and 0 followers. She doubted she'd ever reach the pinnacle of Instagram stardom Luke had with his literal millions of followers, but neither did she have the inclination to worry about it. By the bottom of her second glass of wine, Cammie had found several other artists' accounts to follow and was impressed by the beauty and sophistication of their photographs. Maybe Instagram wasn't so bad after all. She also stumbled across a message capability, and after a splash more Chardonnay, she typed a note to Luke. Now that she'd thought of a bunch of great comebacks, maybe she'd share those with him. He'd more than earned her wrath. Hard to take you seriously when you're showing off your ass. She hit send before she overthought it, and then wondered if she could unsend it. A return message popped up on her phone's screen 1 second later. "It's a nice ass. Can't blame me," she snorted, half bemusement, half frustration. Mostly because she couldn't blame him at all. It was a very nice ass. "Sorry for the TV thing. Thought it would be funny." Well, it wasn't, she typed, feeling justified. "Let me make it up to you," came his next message, followed by another one that made her head swim for reasons that had nothing to do with the wine. "How about dinner?" Luke set his phone on his kitchen counter and backed away like it was a cobra that had escaped its basket. Shit, he shouldn't have done that. He never knew when to ask, when to back off, or when to say pull a woman he barely knew onto live television and introduce her as his fiancée. It was childish. It had also sent his followers into a frenzy. By the looks of Cammie's account, she hadn't been on the gram for long. He could only hope she didn't go as far as reading the hundreds of comments on his most recent photo. Engaged? Read one, followed by several sobbing emojis. I love you. Marry me instead. Read another, followed by hearts of every color. Another comment hailed how beautiful Cammie was true. Another said she'd looked unhappy on TV, also true. He owed her for the prank a result of hurt pride that wasn't her fault. He'd like to take her out, apologize, and make up for the bout of irrational thinking. If she'd let him. He grabbed a bottle of alkalized water from the fridge and peeked back at the screen. Still no answer. Damn it! He uncapped the water and took a drink as his phone rang. He nearly choked before remembering Cammie didn't have his number. It was his sister Sabrina on Seattle time. He answered and listened as she talked animatedly about her week. I miss you, Sab said, her voice sad. You're a million miles away. Not a million. He smiled, missing her too. I'll come home soon. We'll hang. He heard the baritone of Flynn's voice in the background. He was happy for Sab and a touch envious. In the healthiest way possible, but still. Luke's last serious relationship had been years ago when Dawn dumped him on his ass. He'd finally opened himself up to dating again and was now experiencing a dating drought that was almost comical. Speaking of, ran into your friend Cammie at the new gym today. Sab asked 10 questions in a row without letting him answer. When she took a breath, he summarized, dragging Cammie onto live TV. You know how dumb I am around pretty girls. The only time you're ever an idiot, she said affectionately. That made him chuckle. It's a big city, but I'm not surprised you bumped into her. Kismet's that way. Kismet. You think Cammie and I are meant to be? What happened to, you're not allowed to date my friends, Luke? I never said that. Did too. It'd been a few years, but she'd absolutely said it. About Cammie specifically, in fact. Before he could argue how he was right, his phone buzzed in his hand. Adrenaline spilled into his bloodstream when he saw a message from Cammie that read, I have a better idea than dinner. Cammie chewed on the side of her fingernail as she reread the exchange from last night. Thanks to wine and a dose of uncharacteristic moxie, she'd been bold. Show up at my art studio at 10 a.m. tomorrow morning, she'd typed. I'll be there, he'd replied. That was it. He wasn't suspicious of her motives, and she didn't clue him in as to what he'd be walking into. Morning. Good morning. Morning. She greeted her students in quick succession as they filed into her studio. It was a gorgeous, sunny, if windy day in Chicago. Golden rays spilled in through the windows of Sauza's, where she taught painting sculpting, and this morning, nude figure drawing. The problem was that yesterday, she'd received word that Chip, their regular model, wouldn't be able to make it. Enter the invitation to Luke last night. He owed her. She couldn't force Luke to take off his clothes and pose for her class, of course. But oh, she couldn't wait to see the look on his face when she introduced him as the nude model. After he stormed out, her class could practice still life drawings instead. She had picked up a vase of fresh flowers and some fruit on her way in today. Whenever she thought about Luke, her stomach jumped in anxious anticipation. She'd sworn herself off his Instagram account since the perv session she'd participated in last night. It felt wrong to ogle him, though he was really easy to ogle. She'd nearly backed out of their appointment today when she'd woken up this morning, but then remembered her red-faced embarrassment at the gym, and that all morning she'd been correcting her friend's assumptions that the fake news was real. Congrats on your engagement. I'm not engaged. That was a joke. At her expense. Which reminded her of Luke's audacity and infused her with some of her own. Her class was small, 6 total. 5 women and 1 man ranging from ages 22 to 62. She loved this group. They delighted in creating, were gracious, and took art seriously. She set up her own canvas, figuring she could use the class as a chance to brush up on her still life sketching once Luke left, so she wasn't looking at the door when he arrived. She knew, though, because she heard her 62-year-old student Patty gasp. Cammie stood, eyes feasting on Luke's dark jeans and button-down shirt. He carried a bouquet of daisies in one hand and was peering around the room in surprise. Hi, everyone. His sheepish smile arrowed straight through her heart and sent guilt spilling into her gut. Before she could explain, Patty spoke up, her tone pure delight. Cammie, please tell me, This is our nude model for the day. Nude model. It took exactly 3 seconds for Luke to realize what Cammie had done. Easels were lined in a semicircle around a chair draped in a white sheet. He took in the studio a colorful space filled with paintings on the wall, small to medium-sized sculptures, and cubbies filled with art supplies. He recognized at least one of the paintings. Cammie had posted it on Instagram right before messaging him. He'd thought she'd invited him to show off her work. He'd planned on talking her into brunch. Apparently, she'd planned on introducing him as her model to put him on the spot. He guessed she also expected him to turn tail and run like she had yesterday afternoon. Not happening. He loved a dare. Yes, he answered the older woman, throwing in a wink for good measure. I'm the nude model. Cammie's head was shaking back and forth in the universal gesture for no, no, no. These are for you. He handed her the daisies. You don't have to. She smiled uncomfortably. Bring flowers, I know, but I'm so grateful for this opportunity. He slipped the first button of his shirt free. How long is the sitting? As long as you'll give us, the older woman said with a hearty chuckle. Luke had to smile. He was really comfortable with his body. He'd stripped down for photographers for posters and ads for his own gym. Hell, he'd even once posed for a romance book cover. Body sculpting was a work of art by its own right, and he was learning, so was expanding and launching his franchise. Is it full nude or partial? He unzipped his pants and tugged down his jeans. When he bared the top of his ass, Cammie was on him in a flash. Her teeth bared, her anger barely banked. Is there a problem? You've made your point. You don't have to. Her frantic whisper trailed off, but her sea-blue eyes towed him in. Close as they were, it was hard not to lean in and press a kiss to her petal-pink mouth. I'm so into you, he murmured, and you need a model. Those eyes widened, but she didn't argue with him. Listen, I took your comment wrong. Consider this my apology. Grinning, he shoved his pants to his ankles, boxer briefs and all. He'd never been modest, unlike Cammie, who turned her eyes to the ceiling and took a few steps away from him. Ms. Sauza, he called when she retreated. Are there any adjustments you need to make? Hand shielding her eyes, she shook her head, her cheeks going flame red. He struck a comfortable pose and settled in, letting his mind wander to what other parts of her beautiful body would flush in color when he kissed her. It was unprofessional to stare. A nude model sitting was a serious undertaking, and she respected the men and women who'd come in here bared their bodies and were willing to be live subjects. All the greatest painters used live subjects. Having a real human being present allowed an artist to connect with the long-gone greats. The human form was imperfect, made beautiful when its likeness hit paper. Well, most bodies were imperfect. When she dared peek over at Luke, she couldn't find a single part of him that wasn't gorgeous. Like when she'd perused his photos online, she was mesmerized by his male beauty. Even though she shouldn't be. He's technically not a model. True. And more technically, he'd stripped willingly. Was it hot in here? She checked in with each of her students who were skilled in their renderings of Luke's Davidesque form. Reggie had captured his full bottom lip with stark accuracy, and Amara was drawing his chest, currently shading a shadow beneath his pectoral muscle that was there thanks to the sunshine today. The high windows allowed for privacy to anyone walking by. She didn't like the idea of him being ogled from the street. In front of Patty's canvas, Cammie paused, tempted to throw her hands over a certain part of Luke that Patty had spent a great deal of time sketching. The likeness of his penis hung healthy in size and width, surely an exaggeration, but Cam would have to check out the real deal for herself to be sure. She'd intended to sneak the fastest glance imaginable, but once she confirmed he wasn't lacking in size or stature, She let that gaze linger. Uninvited warmth eased through her from breasts to nipples, and then trickling down to her belly and lower. She thought of his photos on Instagram, how sculpted and striking he was. In real life, he was even more breathtaking. By the time she jerked her gaze to Luke's, he was staring her down, those bright green eyes, all knowing. She sensed his smile, but it didn't come from his mouth. His eyes twinkled with merriment. Luke was pleased, and suddenly she thought of pleasing him, of him pleasing her. And no matter how many times she scolded herself for objectifying him, her mind delighted in the images flashing behind her eyes. "How am I doing, Cammie?" Patty pointed to a certain area on her masterpiece. "Is this to scale, do you think?" You... The best judge of your work is yourself," she blurted out hastily and moved on to her next student just as fast. 15 minutes later, the timer buzzed, signaling the end, and Luke pulled his pants over his hips and shrugged into his shirt. Finally, it was over. Except it wasn't. Luke was heading her way. Before the class filed out, they invited Luke to look at their masterpieces. He did impressed with their skill and attention to detail. The older woman, Patty, he'd learned, was unashamedly proud of her work, and he wasn't shy about praising her for it. Cammie had avoided that interaction entirely, choosing to tidy a section of her studio as far away from them as possible. Now it was just him and Cam, and he crossed the room to stand before her. She swung around, her mouth full of a speech she'd evidently been preparing since he'd arrived. "You were supposed to come in here, be embarrassed, and then leave." She lifted and dropped her arms in exasperation. Not, take off your clothes and... He stopped her trail of words by stepping closer, and then a hair closer still. When he was practically nose to nose with her, his nostrils filled with the soft, clean scent of her soap, he had to remind himself she wasn't his to kiss. Not yet. "Have dinner with me." He tucked her red hair behind her ear, savoring the softness of it, and wanting nothing more than to dive in and taste some of the words that had become tangled in her tongue. "What?" The word was a surprised whisper. "A date, actually. Not because you owe me. Not because it's a dare. Because you want to go. And because I want you to come." He let that double entendre dangle between them, and by the darkening of her pupils, he could tell her mind followed where he'd led. "You want to go on a date with me?" "Hell yeah, I do. You're gorgeous and interesting. Incredibly talented." He gestured at a cityscape painting of the Chicago skyline hanging on one wall. "I want to know more about you. Uncover your secrets." She laughed. Was that cheesy? He didn't care. It was the truth. "I'm sure you have more secrets than me. Now you saw all my secrets a few minutes ago." She smiled, and it caused an equal reaction in him. He felt like punching the air in triumph after earning something other than an eye roll or a sarcasm-enriched twist of her lips. "I can't." "Why have a boyfriend?" "No." A quick answer. "Have plans tonight?" "No." "Have to wash your hair?" He fingered the strands before earning another smile from her. She shook her head. "Don't like me?" he teased. You're okay," she managed, but her flirty smile hadn't gone anywhere. "I'll make reservations and message you the details if you give me your phone number." She rattled off 10 digits as he scrambled to punch them into his phone. Then Luke, he turned worried she'd changed her mind. Instead, she said, "See you tonight." Cammie had scrubbed the graphite off her face when she got home, because of course, while Luke had been standing there saying sexy things that weren't supposed to be sexy, she'd been sporting a smudge on her left cheek. She'd also taken the time to curl her wavy hair with a large barreled curling iron and apply a layer of evening makeup which essentially meant a peachier cheek and a swipe of green along her eyelids that reminded her of her date's eye color. "This is crazy," she muttered as she searched in vain for a dress to wear. She was more of a thrift store find girl than a Nordstrom's shopper, which didn't leave her many options. She'd caught the tag on Luke's discarded shirt earlier when avoiding looking at his amazing body Armani. Definitely not a thrift store kind of guy. She had epically bad taste in men, having moved from Seattle to start fresh in Chicago to escape her last doomed relationship. Not that it'd been much of an escape. James had moved on quickly, which was fine with her. She focused on art and Chicago instead of men, and those two distractions had stolen her heart. But now, a totally different Seattle boy had set his sights squarely on her, and given her track record with the men in Washington state, that should be reason enough for her to run away. "I'm into you." Oh, how she'd needed to hear that. He'd been so real, so raw, so vulnerable when those words tumbled from his amazing mouth and after he'd taken off his pants. "Completely crazy," she repeated this time with a light laugh. She was looking forward to spending more time with him. She needed to do something other than work to pay for her studio. She did all right, but not well enough, she thought, as she swept aside another sad frock. Then she saw it. The emerald dress, the color of her eyeshadow and Luke's eyes. It had set off her red hair so perfectly she couldn't leave it at the outlet. The designer price tag had been slashed by 75%, and she'd promised herself to wear it as soon as the opportunity presented itself. She slipped into the sheath, the off-the-shoulder style, sexy but tasteful. Smoothing her fingers over the beaded detail along the neck, she again appreciated the exquisite artisanship. Even in the flimsy full-length mirror on the back of her bedroom door, she looked like she belonged at dinner with a millionaire. Her phone pinged with a text. "Where am I picking you up?" Heart in her throat, Cammie texted him her address and slipped her feet into a pair of black high-heeled shoes she rarely had the chance to wear. Here went nothing.